If you have ever tried to talk yourself out of a feeling that was trying to tell you something, or if you ever looked back on a situation and realized, I knew the whole time, and I just kept finding reasons why it was fine, this video is for you because today I want to talk to you about something that doesn't get addressed in most conversations about toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing. And what we're going to get into isn't just what the pattern is, but why it formed, why your subconscious learned that managing your experience was safer than ever feeling it. Because I think when you can understand the origin of the bypassing pattern, it stops feeling like a character flaw that you need to fix and starts suddenly making complete sense as something that your system built for a very good reason, and that is where change becomes possible. So let's dive in. So first, let me make sure that we're on the same page about what I mean when I say spiritual bypassing or conditioned optimism, because these terms get used a lot and I want to be specific about what exactly I'm pointing at. Spiritual bypassing is not the same thing as being positive. It's not the same thing as having a good attitude or someone who doesn't catastrophize. What I'm talking about is something way more specific. It's when optimism becomes automatic, when the positive reframe kicks in before the feeling even had a chance to land, when your mind produces a reason why something is actually fine before you ever had a chance to actually ask yourself if it is actually fine. And it looks like finding the lesson in something before you've ever let yourself feel it. It looks like talking yourself out of a signal your inner world was trying to send you. It looks like being the person who's always finding the silver lining and doing it so quickly, so consistently that you've stopped noticing that you're even doing it at all. And from the outside, and honestly from the inside too, it looks like emotional maturity. It looks like growth. It looks like someone who has just done so much work on themselves and they've come out on the other side as someone who doesn't spiral, someone who doesn't dwell, someone who just doesn't let things take her down. And that is why it makes it so hard to catch. So why does this matter? Why does it matter if someone is really good at finding the bright side of things? Here is what I see it cost the women that I work with. Every time the bypass kicks in, every time the reframe intercepts a signal before it lands, she loses access to a piece of information her inner world was trying to give her. And that information doesn't just disappear. It just doesn't get received. And so whatever that piece of information was pointing to, whether it was a relationship that isn't working, a boundary that needs to be set, a situation that she's been tolerating way past its expiration date, it stays exactly as it is because she never quite let herself listen to what her inner world was trying to tell her. And when this happens once, it's not a big deal. But the problem is it doesn't just happen once. It happens over and over again, quietly and automatically, and it runs under the surface. And over time, the cost isn't just one dramatic thing. It's a slow accumulation of staying in things that don't fit, staying agreeable when something inside of her actually means no, staying hopeful about situations that her gut has already made a decision about. And she wonders why she can't trust herself, why decisions feel murky, why she keeps ending up in the same dynamics, why something feels just slightly off when everything on the outside looks perfectly fine. And the actual mechanism answer is that the bypassing filter has been running so long that she has lost access to her own inner signal. And you can't build a life that actually fits you when you can't really hear yourself clearly. And that's what spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity costs you. And that's why understanding where it came from matters, because you can't update a program that you can't see or you're not aware of. So let's dive into the origins of this silver lining thinking pattern, this toxic positivity, this spiritual bypassing, this conditioned optimism. In order to get us to the origin, I want to start with a question that might seem a little counterintuitive, but it'll get us there. Instead of asking why the bypass is there, instead of starting with the pattern, I want to start with the opposite. If someone isn't spiritually bypassing, what are they doing instead? Because one, when you can see what someone who doesn't spiritually bypass does instead, it becomes completely clear why you would spiritually bypass in the first place. And two, if spiritually bypassing is a subconscious pattern that you have, you might not even know what it looks like to not do it. So let's look at the opposite. The opposite of spiritually bypassing isn't falling apart. It's not spiraling. It's not being negative. It's not someone who catastrophizes all of the time, someone who can't find the good in anything. The opposite of bypassing looks like this. When something happens that doesn't feel right, whether it's a flicker, a signal, a quiet knowing that something needs your attention, instead of immediately producing a reason why it's fine, you pause. You let it land. You get curious about what it's trying to tell you. You don't rush to the lesson or the positive reframe or the silver lining. You don't rush to the negative either. You kind of let it remain neutral. And neutral does not mean without feeling. Neutral in the story you're telling yourself about what's happening. You stay with the feeling, the experience long enough to hear what it's actually saying. So here's an example. Let's say you're in a friendship. Something happened that didn't feel right. Maybe your friend said something that kind of stung a little bit, and maybe you left the conversation feeling drained in a way that you can't quite name. Maybe there's just this quiet hum of like, something feels off here. And in that moment, before your mind has a chance to jump to, she didn't mean it like that, or I'm probably just being too sensitive, or she's going through a lot right now, you just notice it. You don't analyze it. You don't put a story or meaning to it. You don't try to figure out what it means or what you're supposed to feel about it. You don't build a case. You don't catastrophize. You don't turn it into a whole thing. You just ask yourself one simple question. Wow, what is this? What am I actually feeling right now? Not what should I feel? Not what's the most generous interpretation of this? Not what did she mean to do? Not what would a mature person feel in this moment? Just what is actually here right now? And maybe the answer is, I feel dismissed. Or I feel like I keep showing up for her and it doesn't go both ways. Or I feel like I can't say certain things around her without it becoming about her. And you just let that be true for just a second without immediately doing anything about it, without rushing to resolve it or reframe it or make it feel more comfortable. That's it. That's staying with it. It's not dramatic. It's not a whole process. It's just the pause between feeling something and deciding what to do about it. It's feeling the sensation and staying with it even if it feels uncomfortable. It's giving the signal enough time to finish its sentence before you respond. And what that pause does, even if it's just a few seconds, is give you access to your own knowing, the real version, not the edited one that feels nicer or better. And then from that place, having actually received the information, you then decide what to do with it. Maybe you do find the silver lining. Maybe you do choose perspective. Maybe you do choose to see it as a positive. Maybe you do choose to be understanding and compassionate for the other person. But it comes after the feeling and the information you gathered from your inner world, not instead of it. That girl who doesn't bypass, that girl is kind of who I call the authentic, embodied, healed version of us. She's not more emotional than the bypasser, and she's not more negative. She's actually more settled and more grounded because she's in a relationship with her own inner world. She trusts what comes up. She doesn't need to manage her experience before she's allowed to have it. And when you watch her make decisions, when you watch her navigate relationships and opportunities and situations that aren't working, there's a clarity to it. Not because she has everything figured out, but because she's working from her own inner knowing rather than a carefully edited version of it. And that's the woman who's on the other side of the spiritual bypassing and the silver lining thinking pattern. So can you see how it starts to paint a picture of like, oh, okay, I'm kind of starting to see where the origin might be coming from. So now that we know how she behaves, because our actions and behaviors are always stemming from our beliefs, let's look at her beliefs. What does she believe that makes all of those behaviors possible? And more importantly, what got installed in you as a bypasser instead? And how did it get there? That's where we're going to go next. Now that you can see what it actually looks like, the pause, the signal, the knowing before the reframe, the question then becomes, okay, what does she believe that makes that her default? Because it's not discipline. It's not willpower. It's not that she's more emotionally evolved. It's that something underneath is different. The thing that is guiding her actions and behaviors is different. And I think it comes down to three things. The first is she believes that her feelings are information, not emergencies. She doesn't treat every uncomfortable emotion like something that needs to be immediately fixed or reframed or resolved. She can feel disappointed and just let herself be disappointed. She can feel something is off and just let that be information. She doesn't need to convert every difficult feeling into a lesson before she's allowed to move on. She trusts that the feeling itself is enough and that awareness is productive on its own. The second is she believes that reality doesn't become more threatening when she acknowledges it. And this one is subtle, but it's huge because a lot of bypassing has this unconscious logic underneath it that says, if I admit how much this hurts, it becomes more real. If I acknowledge that this isn't working, I've made it worse. So you jump to the silver lining not to make things better, but to outrun the reality. The healed woman, that girl, understands something different. The truth was already true before she decided to look at it. And looking directly at something doesn't create it, but it does let you respond to what already exists. And so then the third thing I think she believes, and this one is I think the deepest one, she believes that she can trust herself with what she knows, not just what she feels. With what she knows. Even when what she knows is inconvenient, even when what she knows requires something of her, a boundary, a conversation, a change, a disappointment, she doesn't need permission from reality to trust her own signal. She doesn't need a villain in her story. She doesn't need a catastrophe to happen. She doesn't need a courtroom case against something before she's allowed to respond to her own inner knowing. She trusts herself enough to act on what's true for her, even when it's hard and even when it's uncomfortable and inconvenient to someone else and even herself. If those are the beliefs that make authenticity the default, what's running instead for the woman who bypasses? Because it's not nothing. It's not just an absence of those beliefs. It's something specific, something your subconscious concluded that makes the bypass not just understandable, but actually really logical. So this is where the work gets very nuanced and it can be slightly differently textured for all of us, but here are some of the most common ones that I see in my practice is usually the beliefs that get installed in the bypasser are something of this texture. If I fully feel this, what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, it will consume me. So I need to manage it before it lands. If I acknowledge that something isn't right, I'll have to do something about it, and I don't trust myself with what that requires. If I stop looking for the silver lining, I'll fall apart, or I'll become bitter, or I'll lose the progress that I've made. And again, these are unconscious beliefs. These are subconscious beliefs. So you're not going out around your day-to-day life thinking these things. So they may not even be in your awareness, but we can track back the beliefs based on the behaviors because your beliefs lead to your behaviors. So when we can kind of like reverse engineer, this is typically what's running under the surface, some texture, some flavor of this, whether it's this or something that's kind of stemmed from something in this realm. When that's what your system learned is true, the silver lining isn't avoidance, it's protection. It's the most logical response to a world your subconscious decided was too costly to feel directly. And that's where the origin comes in, because those beliefs, they don't come from nowhere. So where do the beliefs come from? A child doesn't come into this world believing that her feelings are emergencies. She doesn't arrive out of the womb believing that reality becomes more threatening when she acknowledges it. She doesn't inherently hide from her emotions. She doesn't arrive believing that she can't trust herself with her own inner knowing. These beliefs get learned. They get installed through experiences, through our environment, through osmosis of the people we're around, the things that we're hearing, the things we're seeing, the things that are being modeled to us when we're growing up, through the meaning that your subconscious made from what was happening around you and to you before you had any framework to make sense of it. So we go into this whole process inside of my Decode program. I'll link that below if you want to kind of dive into how our subconscious programming actually gets installed so you can understand what yours might be and start to be able to work with it. I'll link that below. But here's how this works for this pattern. Your subconscious is a meaning-making machine. It is constantly taking in experiences and drawing conclusions from them, not consciously, not deliberately, automatically. Your subconscious's entire job is to learn what's safe and what isn't, what's allowed and what isn't, what gets love and what doesn't, what gets connection and what threatens it. And when an experience happens, especially early, especially repeated, especially highly emotional, your subconscious doesn't just store that memory, it stores the conclusion, the meaning it made from what happened. And that conclusion becomes a belief. And that belief becomes an operating system, a rule your system has been quietly following ever since. And then that changes your behavior. And the thing about those conclusions is they made complete sense when you came to the conclusion at the time. They were logical given what you were experiencing. If expressing a feeling consistently led to conflict or disconnection or being called too much, the conclusion your subconscious drew wasn't wrong, right? It was accurate. Based on available evidence, feelings create problems. Manage them before they surface. It makes sense. If acknowledging that something wasn't right consistently led to things getting harder, your subconscious learned something true. Looking directly at reality has consequences. Soften it before it lands. The belief was true at the time. If trusting your own knowing consistently led to disappointment or loss or having to navigate something alone, your system drew the only reasonable conclusion. Your knowing isn't safe to act on. Find a way to make things okay instead. And those conclusions, those operating instructions, they didn't disappear when your circumstances changed. That would be amazing, but that's just not how the subconscious works. They don't just disappear when you grow up. They don't just disappear when you leave those environments, when you do the work and you build a whole different life for yourself. That's just not how the subconscious works. It doesn't automatically update when the environment does. It keeps running the program that kept you safe back then, quietly, automatically, and below the level awareness can reach. So you become a woman who is self-aware, who has done enormous amounts of personal development work, who genuinely wants to trust herself and stay true to herself, and who still finds the silver lining before the feeling lands, who still talks herself out of what she knows, still arrives pre-edited to her own life. Not because something is wrong with you, but because the program that it got installed is still running. And it was installed at the level of your mind that you haven't been able to reach yet. So let's connect all of these dots that we're starting to unpack here, because this is the piece that makes everything kind of click together. When those beliefs are running, when your subconscious is operating from beliefs of feelings are emergencies, reality is threatening to acknowledge, my knowing can't be trusted, the silver lining isn't a choice. It's a protection response. It's your system doing exactly what it was programmed to do. And here's what that looks like in real time. Something happens, a signal surfaces, a flicker of, ooh, this doesn't feel right. This isn't working. Something here needs my attention. And that signal, if you followed it, would lead somewhere. It would lead to a knowing. And that knowing would require something of you. It would require a boundary that might disappoint someone. It would require a conversation that might create conflict. It would require a decision that might mean leaving something behind. It might require a truth that might make things harder before they get better. And your subconscious realizes that. It recognizes that, not consciously and not deliberately, but it recognizes and it registers the threat in that. And it does what it was built to do. It intercepts the signal. So that way you don't have to get yourself to the point of dealing with those things. And the interception doesn't feel like suppression. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like perspective. It feels like maturity. It feels like I'm not going to spiral in this. I'm just going to find the good in it. And it feels like growth. But what's actually happening underneath the surface is your system just protected you from having to know something it decided was too costly to know. And this is the thing that I want you to really sit with, because this is what reframes this entire pattern. You aren't bypassing because you can't handle the feelings. You're bypassing because you can't yet trust yourself with what your feelings are asking of you. The feeling isn't the threat. The knowing is. Because the knowing requires action. And the action threatens something your subconscious has decided is threatening. Being too much, disappointing someone, losing something, choosing yourself over keeping the peace. So the silver lining steps in, the bypassing steps in, and it does its job perfectly. It takes the signal and it softens it just enough that you don't have to finish the thought. You don't even have to address that it's even there. It doesn't have to arrive at the knowing. It doesn't have to do anything about what might be true. And you move on. And the pattern stays intact and nothing changes. And that's exactly what the subconscious wants of you. It wants to keep you in what is familiar. Nothing changes because you aren't trying. It's not because you don't want better for yourself, but because the program that's running is older and faster and more deeply installed than any conscious intention you bring to it. And that is why understanding the origin matters. Not to blame the past, not to make meaning out of the pain, but because when you can see where the program came from, you stop experiencing it as a character flaw. You start seeing it as something that made complete sense given what you learned. And that's the first real crack in the door. That's the first real opening, because you can't update something you're still busy judging yourself for having. Here is what actually changes when the work gets done at the correct level, at the root in the subconscious. And I want to be specific about what I mean by that, because the shift isn't you become someone who never finds a silver lining. It's not that you become more negative or you stop being able to see the good in things. That's not the goal, and that's not what happens. What shifts is the sequence. You still find the perspective, you still find the lesson, you still find the good, but you find it after the feeling lands, not instead of it. And that difference, that one shift in sequence, it changes everything, because now the signal gets received. The knowing gets to finish its sentence. You get to decide what to do with the information, with the signal, from a place of actually knowing rather than a place of having successfully managed your way around it. What that looks like in practice is you stop waiting for permission to trust yourself. You stop needing a villain in the story or a catastrophe or an ironclad case against something before you're allowed to respond to what's true for you. You stop requiring reality to be obvious, undeniably, objectively bad before you're allowed to acknowledge that it isn't right for you. You get to leave things when they don't feel right instead of wasting time and wasting energy hoping one day it might change, when that feeling in your gut has been there all along. Because you start to understand something that you couldn't even access before. Not right for me is enough. That's it. That's the belief that changes everything. Not a complicated reframe, not a new framework, just your own knowing is sufficient reason. Your own signal is worth trusting. Your own experience of something is valid data even when nobody else sees it as a problem. And when that belief lands, really lands on a subconscious level, not just intellectually, but in the body, in the subconscious, where the old programming used to run, the silver lining loses its job. Not because you forced it to, not because you put a sticky note on your bathroom mirror and decided that you were going to stop doing this, but because the fear it was protecting you from just isn't there anymore. The boundary doesn't feel as threatening. The disappointment doesn't feel as catastrophic. The truth doesn't feel as costly. So you don't need to bypass as much, because you don't need to be protected from your own knowing anymore. You start showing up unedited, not perfectly, not all at once, but in small amounts that actually start to compound and accumulate. You say the thing that you would have swallowed in the past. You leave the conversation you would have talked yourself into staying in. You leave the dynamics that are not good for you when you feel that they're not good for you, not when you've gathered enough evidence. You trust the flicker that you have before you ever reframed it away. And slowly, through those moments, through the evidence that they create, your subconscious starts to update, starts to learn something new, that the signal is safe to receive, that the knowing won't destroy you, and that you can be trusted with what's true for you, that you can trust your inner world. And that's when authenticity stops being something that you have to work at and starts being something that you simply are. It becomes effortless. It becomes automatic. It becomes embodied in your body, in your cells, in your soul, in your being, because it's embodied on the subconscious level. So, one last thing I just want to be really honest with you about: understanding this, everything we just talked about, the beliefs, the behaviors, what's going on under the surface, what needs to change. Understanding this, even feeling it land the way that I hope it did today, is the beginning. But It's not the whole thing. Because the program we've been talking about, the one that's installed those beliefs, the one that built that bypass, the one that's been running underneath everything, that didn't get installed at the conscious level, and it doesn't get updated there either. You can understand this completely. You can watch yourself do it in real time. You can know with absolute certainty that the silver lining thinking pattern is running and why. And you can still find yourself reaching for it, because knowing about a subconscious pattern doesn't automatically change it. It just makes it visible. The actual work, the work that builds the beliefs that we talked about today, that updates the conclusions that your system draws, that creates the evidence that your subconscious needs to learn that your knowing is safe to trust, that work happens under the surface on the subconscious level, at the level where the program actually lives. And that is exactly what we do inside of my program, The Anxiety Shift. And I would love to invite you in, because we go underneath the pattern and we work on the deeper layers so that you can actually start trusting your own experience, so that you can feel comfortable setting boundaries, so you can stop fearing conversations that might create conflict, so you can feel comfortable making decisions from your own knowing without needing to explain or justify them to yourself first. When we update those layers at the subconscious level, the beliefs that got installed, the conclusions your system drew, the fears underneath, the reason you bypass, the silver lining thinking that has been costing you your authenticity no longer needs to protect anything. All of the ground that it was standing on gets dissolved naturally, not through force, not through willpower, not through little sticky note affirmations on your mirror, just because the thing it was built to protect against isn't threatening anymore. And authenticity stops being something that you have to remind yourself to practice and starts being something that your system just defaults to. So if that is what you're looking for, I would love to have you inside. I will put all of the details down in the description, and I will see you over in this next video.